Hey guys, it is Wednesday, and it would not be Wednesday if I wasn't bringing a word from the Lord to my Brightmoor youth family, all right? And that's you guys. I'm so glad that you are able to watch this. I'm so glad that we have technology that enables us to have some sort of a youth service, right? Even though this doesn't look like a typical youth service, right? You're not physically here in the room, in the building with me as much as I wish you were. But I can still bring the word to you guys. You guys can still get fed with the word on Wednesdays, and that's what this is. And so we're going to jump into John chapter 3. We are reading through the book of John together as a youth group right now. And so if you haven't started, now's a great time. Read John chapter 3 today. And we're reading one chapter a day until we get all the way through this. Man, it's already been so great. We've had some great feedback and interaction correlating to the chapter of each day. So John chapter 3 is where I'm going to be bringing the word from. And before I jump into that, let me tell you a story. All right, there was a man named Akiva. Now, in Akiva's day, he lived in the time shortly after Jesus, right? And like scholars will tell us, the greatest rabbi that ever lived, that was Jesus. We're all going to say that, right? The greatest Jewish teacher, the greatest Jewish rabbi of all time. Yeah, Jesus. He was the GOAT for sure, right? But a lot of scholars will tell you the second greatest rabbi, the second wisest teacher that ever lived was a man by the name Akiva. Now, Akiva, he lived a ways outside of town, and every single day he would walk the path from his house into town, and then he would do his business in town. He would go to the marketplace, and then he would go to the synagogue, and he would teach, and he would interact with people, and he would do his business throughout the day, and then he would leave, and he would go back. And he always made sure that he was back home before it got dark. He always made sure that he was all the way safely in his home, because, this was obviously before the days of like having a flashlight or having a car with headlights, right? And so he would have to get home before dark. Well, one day in particular, Akiva kind of got caught up talking to some people in the marketplace, and it got dark, right? So as it started to get dark, he's like, oh no, I'm gonna be late. It's gonna be hard for me to get home. And so he took off. And in his hurriedness, in his haste of getting down the path before he could no longer see the path, he actually ended up taking a wrong turn. There was a fork in the road, and he went the wrong way because it was dark and he was hurried. And so as he took the wrong path, he was going away from his house. And eventually he came up on what he thought was the path to his house, but it was the walls of another city. And we stood at the walls of this city. He was confused. He didn't know what was happening. And he was looking at this big wall, not sure where he was, and he heard a voice out of the darkness on top of the wall that shouted down to him. And this man that was on top of the wall, he shouted down to Akiva. He said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And Akiva was confused. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know what this voice was. He asked, "What?" And the man shouted again from the top of the wall. He said, "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" And Akiva stopped for a minute, and he thought about what happened. He realized where he was, but he had a deeper thought than just where he was. He shouted up to the man that he couldn't see. It was a voice in the darkness. He said, "How much are they paying you to ask me those questions?" The man was confused. He said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Because however much you're getting paid to ask me those questions, I'll pay you double to stand outside my house. And every morning when I leave and every night when I come back, I want you to ask me those same two questions. Who are you and what are you doing here?" Because see, Akiva understood the importance of knowing who you are and what you are doing. Not just your name and the task you're trying to accomplish at that time, but who you really are at the core of your being. Who has God created you to be, and what has God called you and created you to do? And keeping that in mind every single day was so important, and Akiva understood that. All right, and we're gonna look at John chapter 3, and in the book of John chapter 3, in the latter part of the chapter, we're gonna look at John the Baptist and how he understood who he was and what he was doing there, and who he was created to be, and what he was created to do. So in John chapter 3, starting in verse 27, it says, John replied, "No one can receive anything unless God gives it from heaven. You yourselves know how plainly I told you, I am not the Messiah, I am only here to prepare the way for him. He understood this. He said, this is who I am, and this is what I'm doing here. I'm not the Messiah, I'm just a man. That's who I am. I am a man. I am created by God. And then what I'm doing here is I am here to prepare the way for Jesus. He knew the importance of who he was and what he was doing, and that's what he was declaring. That's what he was doing with his life, right? And a few verses later, in verse 30, he says, he must become greater and greater, and I must become less and less. I love that. Think about that. If you understand who you are and what you're doing here on earth, if you understand that you are created by God and you are a child of God, and what you're doing here, what you're called and created to do is point people in the direction of Jesus, tell people about him, point them towards him. Man, when you do that, you understand you must become less and he must become greater in anything and everything that you're doing. See, we got to understand, guys, that even though we look around and we're like, man, a lot of stuff seems like it's canceled, right? Our typical youth service is canceled. Our typical church service is canceled. Understand this, that church isn't canceled because you are the church. We are the church. And so you can't say church is canceled because you're not canceled. We're not canceled. And who you are is you are the church. And what are you doing here? What should you be doing here? You should be pointing people to Jesus. And so I want you to ask yourself, in this moment, in this time where things are crazy, this is a time that we are going to be in the history books, right? This whole virus outbreak is something that people in the future, they are going to look back and they're going to read this in the history books. And what version of history do you want them to read? Are they going to read that the church rose up during this time? And they reached out and they asked people what they needed and they pointed people towards Jesus. I want you to think about, what do you have in this time, in this moment, that maybe somebody else might need? Maybe it's not even something physical. Maybe it's something spiritual, right? Maybe you have something spiritual or whatever to offer to somebody else. Your prayers, your time, your just the fact that you care. Man, what can you do to be the church? Keep in mind, who are you and what are you doing here? Man, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, for watching this. Man, again, I'm so glad that we're able to connect even in some sort of way on a Wednesday, because it would not be Wednesday, right, without connecting with my Brightmoor Youth family. Hope to see you guys soon.